The crystal tumbler shattered against the marble floor the moment she collapsed. My daughter-in-law's mother, Victoria, was convulsing on my pristine kitchen tiles, white foam gathering at her lips. And my only thought was, that wasn't meant for her. I'm Margaret Chen, 72 years old, and I didn't survive 4 decades building a tech empire in Silicon Valley by being naive. When someone tries to poison you at your own celebration dinner, you notice, especially when that person has been eyeing your fortune like a starving wolf watches a wounded deer. 2 hours earlier, my penthouse in downtown Seattle had been filled with champagne toasts and congratulations. I'd just sold my cybersecurity company for $31 million. My son, David, had insisted on hosting this intimate gathering. "Mom, you deserve this," he'd said, those earnest hazel eyes working their magic. "Let Amanda handle everything. You just enjoy yourself." I should have known something was wrong when Amanda, who usually couldn't organize a grocery list, suddenly transformed into a perfectionist event planner. The woman was arranging orchids and adjusting lighting like her survival depended on it. Which, as it turned out, it did. The gathering was elegant. About 40 guests from my professional network, a few neighbors, and family. Amanda had even hired a mixologist who crafted specialty cocktails with dry ice effects. "Only the best for you, Margaret," she'd purred, her perfectly manicured nails, those weekly salon visits that cost more than most people's car payments, gripping my arm. I was discussing quantum encryption with my former CTO when I saw it happen. Amanda stood near the bar, nervously glancing around before retrieving a small amber vial from her designer clutch. My blood froze as I watched her empty its contents into a specific glass, the vintage tumbler with the hairline crack that I always used, a gift from my late husband. Now, a reasonable person might have screamed, called security, confronted her immediately, but I've learned that the best way to catch a predator is to let them think they've cornered their prey. So I smiled, nodded at whatever my CTO was saying about blockchain vulnerabilities, and kept watching with laser focus. Amanda lifted my poisoned drink and began walking toward me, her expression a perfect mask of filial concern. "Margaret, you look exhausted," she said, offering me the tumbler. "Here, try this special whiskey cocktail. You've earned it." I accepted the glass, thanked her warmly, and waited. About 12 minutes later, when she was busy showing off her new diamond tennis bracelet, another extravagant purchase they couldn't afford, to the neighbors, I quietly switched glasses with Victoria, who stood nearby looking somewhat lost without a drink. Victoria had always been scattered, poor woman. She grabbed the nearest glass without thinking, the one I'd just placed beside her purse. Within minutes, she was complimenting the drink's unique herbal notes and asking if I'd imported it from Japan. The rest happened with terrifying speed. I knelt beside Victoria while Amanda screamed for someone to call 911, her performance of shock almost convincing. Almost. The problem with being a would-be murderer is that genuine panic looks very different from manufactured panic when you know what to observe. "What happened?" David demanded, pushing through the gathering crowd. His face was ashen, but I caught something else. A quick, meaningful glance toward Amanda that lasted just a fraction too long. "I don't know," Amanda sobbed, clutching my arm with theatrical desperation. "She just collapsed. 1 minute she was fine, the next—" She gestured helplessly at her mother, who was now unconscious but still breathing, thank God. The paramedics arrived within minutes. As they worked on Victoria, loading her onto a stretcher, I studied David's face. 34 years of motherhood had taught me to read his expressions like code. Right now, he looked like a programmer watching, his algorithm crash spectacularly. "Which hospital?" I asked the lead paramedic. "Harborview Medical Center. Are you family?" "Close friend," I said, glancing meaningfully at Amanda, who was too busy hyperventilating into a paper bag to notice. "I'll follow." David stepped forward quickly. "Mom, you don't need to. We'll handle everything. You should stay here, rest after your big day." How thoughtful. Keep the target at home while they figured out what went wrong. Nonsense, I said firmly. Victoria is practically family. I'm coming. I grabbed my purse and coat before anyone could argue further. At the hospital, I positioned myself close enough to overhear the medical staff. Victoria's condition was listed as acute poisoning, cause unknown. A young resident mentioned something about plant-based toxins to the attending physician, specific enough to suggest someone had done extensive research. Amanda paced the waiting room, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum like a countdown timer. David sat rigidly in a plastic chair, his phone buzzing constantly with texts he seemed reluctant to answer. "This is just terrible," Amanda said for perhaps the 6th time. "Poor Mom. I can't understand how this happened." I patted her shoulder sympathetically. "These things are often mysterious, dear. I'm sure the doctors will figure it out." Then I added, almost casually, "You know, it's fortunate she didn't drink much of that cocktail. Only a few sips before she collapsed." Amanda's pacing faltered, barely noticeable, but I caught it. "Cocktail? You think the drink caused this?" "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing," I said with a dismissive wave. "Just an old woman's mind looking for patterns." But Amanda's face had gone a shade paler, and her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee. David was watching our exchange with the intensity of a security analyst monitoring a breach. 3 hours later, a doctor emerged to inform us Victoria was stable but would need overnight observation for monitoring. "The toxicology tests are still running," he said, "but whatever she ingested is slowly metabolizing out of her system." "Can we see her?" Amanda asked, her voice cracking. "Family only, and she's heavily sedated. Best to return tomorrow morning." As we left the hospital, David walked me to my car. "Mom, maybe you should stay with us tonight. After what happened, I'd feel better if you weren't alone." How convenient, especially since Victoria's medical emergency had probably left them wondering if I suspected anything. The answer was yes, absolutely, but they didn't need to know that yet. "That's sweet, dear, but I'll be fine. I have that new smart security system, remember?" I kissed his cheek and got into my Tesla, watching in my rearview mirror as he and Amanda had what looked like an urgent, heated conversation in the parking lot. Back home, I poured myself a real glass of wine from a fresh, sealed bottle naturally and settled into my study. Time to figure out exactly what my loving family had planned, and more importantly, what I was going to do about it. I spent the night doing what I'd become exceptional at during 45 years in tech: research. Not the digital kind, but the kind you do with a sharp memory and a suspicious mind. Victoria's poisoning wasn't random, and it certainly wasn't accidental. Someone had planned to kill me at my own celebration, probably hoping it would look like a stroke or cardiac event. At 72, these things happen. Nobody questions a successful woman's heart giving out from decades of stress. But why? That was the $31 million question, wasn't it? I made coffee at 5 in the morning and sat at my kitchen island with my tablet, reviewing everything I knew about David and Amanda's financial situation. It wasn't pretty. David's architectural firm had been hemorrhaging money since a major client lawsuit 2 years ago. Amanda's luxury lifestyle consulting business was more Instagram fantasy than actual revenue. They lived extravagantly, too extravagantly for their real income. Their mortgage on that glass and steel house in Bellevue was 4 times what they could reasonably afford. The matching Range Rovers in their driveway were leased at ruinous rates. Amanda's shopping addiction alone could fund a startup. I'd helped them, of course. What mother wouldn't? A few thousand here when David mentioned cash flow problems. The down payment on their house when Amanda cried about needing the right address for her brand. Private school tuition for my granddaughter Lily when they insisted public education wasn't adequate. Looking at my records, I'd given them nearly $250,000 over the past 6 years. Gifts, I'd called them. Investments in their happiness. Never loans. That would have been crude. but now I wondered if they'd seen those gifts differently, less like maternal generosity and more like advance payments on an inheritance they couldn't wait to collect. The phone rang at 7:30. Amanda, calling to check on me. "Margaret, I couldn't sleep all night thinking about you," she said, her voice heavy with manufactured concern. "After what happened to Mom, I just worry that maybe there was something contaminated at the party. You didn't feel ill at all, did you?" How thoughtful of her to verify whether her poison had found its intended target. "Not at all, dear. I feel perfectly fine. Have you heard anything more about Victoria? The doctors say she should be discharged today. They think maybe she had an adverse reaction to some herbal supplements she'd been taking. You know how she experiments with those wellness trends." Victoria Chen was many things, but reckless with supplements wasn't one of them. The woman was a retired pharmacist who treated her health regimen like a clinical trial. "That's such a relief," I said. "I was worried it might have been something at the party. That would have been devastating." "Oh no, definitely not," Amanda said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "The doctors were very clear it wasn't foodborne, just an unfortunate coincidence." Interesting how eager she was to shut down any investigation into what happened in my home. Almost as if she worried someone might test the remaining cocktails. After hanging up, I walked to my bar and looked at the bottles the mixologist had left. Still there, sitting innocently on the counter. I wondered what would happen if I had them tested at a private lab. My doorbell rang at 9 o'clock. David stood on my doorstep, holding a bag from my favorite French bakery, looking every inch the concerned son. "Thought you might want some breakfast," he said, kissing my cheek. "You probably didn't sleep much after everything." I let him in and made fresh coffee while he arranged the croissants on a plate. Watching him move around my kitchen, I felt a deep sadness. This was still my boy, the one who used to code his first programs on my old laptop and proudly show me his architectural sketches. When had that boy become a man who stood by while his wife tried to murder his mother? "How are you holding up, Mom?" he asked, settling across from me. "You know me. Takes more than a little excitement to rattle these old circuits." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's what worries me, actually." An odd thing to say. I sipped my coffee and waited. "The thing is," David continued, picking at a croissant, "Amanda and I have been talking about your situation." "My situation?" "You're 72, Mom. Living alone in this penthouse, managing all that money from the sale." He gestured vaguely. "It just seems like a lot for one person to handle." There it was, the setup for whatever they had planned next. "I appreciate your concern, dear," I said, keeping my voice light, "but I've been managing quite well so far." David leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Have you, though? I mean, yesterday's incident with Victoria. What if that had been you? What if you'd collapsed and no one found you for hours?" The audacity was breathtaking. He was using their failed murder attempt as justification for why I needed supervision. "David," I said carefully, "Victoria collapsed at a party. With 40 witnesses and paramedics arrived in minutes. Hardly a cautionary tale about living alone." "That's not what I meant." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture from his teenage years when he was about to ask for something he knew I'd refuse. "Look, Amanda and I have been researching. There are excellent senior living communities, places with activities, medical staff on site, security." "A nursing home," I said flatly. "You want to put me in a nursing home?" "Not a nursing home, a luxury retirement community. We found one called Emerald Heights, only 15 minutes from our house. It has everything, a golf course, art studios, even a tech lab for residents who want to stay current." I studied the brochure he showed me on his phone. Everyone looked so content, probably because they were heavily medicated and had surrendered control of their lives. "The only thing is," David continued, "there's usually a waiting list. But if someone acts quickly, they can secure a spot. It requires a substantial entrance fee, about $500,000, but it covers everything for life. 500,000. That would make a nice dent in my liquid assets, wouldn't it? And once I was safely tucked away in Emerald Heights, who would have power of attorney over the remaining 30 million? It sounds lovely, I said. But I'm quite happy here. This penthouse holds so many memories. Mom, you've been here 15 years since Dad died. Don't you think it's time for a new chapter? If I hadn't seen what I'd seen at the party, I might have actually considered his suggestion. My son, worried about his aging mother, wanting to ensure her safety and care. It would have been touching. Instead, it was terrifying. I'll think about it, I said finally. It's a significant decision. David's relief was visible. Of course. Take your time. Maybe we could visit Emerald Heights next week, just to look around? Maybe, I said, standing to clear the breakfast dishes. I should call Victoria today. Make sure she's recovering well. Actually, Mom, David said quickly, Amanda asked me to tell you that Victoria needs complete rest for a few days. The doctors said visitors might be too stimulating while her system recovers. How convenient. Keep me away from the victim until the evidence metabolized out of her system and her memory became unreliable. After David left, I sat in my study and made a decision. They'd waited until after I sold the company to make their move. Smart. If I'd died 6 months ago, my wealth would have gone to David through my will anyway, with different tax implications. But killing me now, especially if they could first establish signs of declining mental capacity, would give them grounds to challenge any recent estate changes. I picked up my phone and called my attorney, Robert Kim. Robert, I need to see you today. It's urgent. Sarah, is everything all right? I looked out my floor-to-ceiling windows at the Seattle skyline, at the city where I'd built my empire from nothing. I'm not sure, I said quietly, but I think my son and his wife just tried to kill me, and I'm going to make absolutely certain they never try again. 3 months later, I sat in my penthouse garden, a rooftop oasis I'd had installed after everything happened, watching the sunset paint the Space Needle gold. Amanda was serving 12 years for attempted murder. David received 5 years for conspiracy and accessory to attempted murder. The evidence had been overwhelming. The toxicology reports, the security footage I'd had secretly installed weeks before the party that showed Amanda tampering with my drink, her financial records showing she'd researched and purchased oleander extract online, and finally, Victoria's testimony. My former daughter-in-law had been so confident she'd left a digital trail a first-year cybersecurity student could follow. Lily, my 16-year-old granddaughter, had moved in with me. She was thriving, finally free from her parents' toxic influence. Yesterday, she'd been accepted into MIT's early admission program for computer science. "Grandma Margaret," she'd said, hugging me tight, "I want to be just like you. Strong, smart, unbreakable." I'd started a foundation with part of my wealth, the Chen Institute for Elder Protection and Financial Literacy. We helped seniors recognize the warning signs of financial abuse and exploitation, especially from family members. Victoria had become my co-director, 2 women who'd survived their own children's greed, now protecting others. My new will was ironclad, structured in trusts that would benefit Lily's education and future, fund my foundation, and support various tech education programs for underprivileged youth. David would receive nothing upon his release except a letter I'd already written, explaining that love isn't measured in dollars, and betrayal costs more than money can buy. I'd learned something profound at 72. Age doesn't make you powerless. Experience, wisdom, and the courage to act, those are what make you formidable. My son and daughter-in-law had made the fatal mistake of confusing my silver hair with weakness, my generosity with stupidity. As I sipped my wine and watched the city lights flicker on below, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a deep, quiet peace. I'd protected myself, saved my granddaughter, and turned my pain into purpose. At 72, I discovered that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well, staying sharp, and making sure the people who underestimated you learn exactly how expensive that mistake can be. Some people see retirement as an ending. I see it as a beginning, the freedom to spend my remaining years doing exactly what I want, surrounded by people who love me for who I am, not what I have. And if anyone else tries to test this fragile old woman, well, they'll discover what everyone in Silicon Valley already knew. Margaret Chen didn't build an empire by being easy to fool. She built it by being impossible to beat.